This is not a waiver of any kind. It is supplemental and cumulative, not substitutive. It is not intended as entertainment, retaliation, reputational manipulation, or repetitive public argument. Its purpose is to make evident the perpetuation of a dehumanizing mechanism in which my authenticity, my seriousness, and my authority over my explicitly stated position continue to be treated as negotiable. I do not consider that acceptable by any reasonable human standard. There comes a point where continued ambiguity stops being plausibly innocent, where enough has been stated, enough has been clarified, enough procedural seriousness has been demonstrated, and enough measured good faith effort has been made that continued ambiguity no longer reflects absence of clarity. It reflects social maintenance of non-recognition, demonstrating refusal to give clarity its normal substantive effect. That distinction is critical. I have not been vague, unserious, indecisive, internally conflicted, or procedurally reckless. I have not been intellectually or emotionally dishonest or incoherent. I've gone to extraordinary lengths to communicate in a measured, structured, explicit, and dignity-preserving manner, while still making the gravity of these matters unmistakable. And yet I remain faced with the same broader reality. My authenticity is still treated as negotiable, my seriousness is still treated as non-binding, and my explicitly articulated position is still being filtered through mechanisms of ambiguity, image management, indirectness, and narrative convenience, rather than being met substantively. I do not regard that as a legitimate failure of communication on my part. I regard it as a failure of others to grant basic authoritative reality to me, while I'm directly and explicitly expressing my own position. That is dehumanizing. It substitutes external narrative management, external comfort, external optics, and external interpretive convenience in place of direct recognition of openly stated reality. It turns one's own explicit humanity into something filtered, delayed, softened, and perpetually made conditional on whether surrounding actors feel sufficiently comfortable recognizing it. I reject that absolutely. My identity is not a group project. My sincerity is not a matter for indefinite social experimentation. My seriousness is not something that should require endless proof. My explicitly stated intentions are not subject to perpetual demotion beneath narratives that are more emotionally or politically convenient for others. Yet the pattern I continue to observe is exactly that. Calmness is treated as softness, restraint is treated as controllability, disciplined communication is treated as evidence that matters are somehow less severe than stated, and refusal to become theatrically or self-destructively explosive is treated as permission to continue absorbing my position into ambiguity. That is profoundly unreasonable. It creates an environment in which the most integrity-preserving communication is rewarded not with substantive recognition, but with further delay in substantive recognition. Behaving with maturity becomes the very mechanism through which one is denied mature treatment. I consider that a serious failure of the surrounding response, not of me. I should not need to destroy my dignity in order to prove that my dignity matters. I should not need to abandon disciplined communication in order to prove seriousness. I should not need to emotionally collapse in order to prove harm. I should not need to utilize extreme rhetoric before basic authoritative acknowledgement is granted to what has already been communicated with more than adequate clarity. Any environment that functionally demands that is not behaving reasonably. It is behaving in a manner hostile to authentic human recognition. That is what I have demonstrated to be the central escalation. That my existence as an authoritative narrator of my own clearly stated reality continues to be treated as though it is secondary to ambiguity that should have never meaningfully existed. I consider that extremely serious. The seriousness, coherency, and integrity of my position is not somehow unclear, unstable, exaggerated, or procedurally unsupported. The threshold at which continued ambiguity could plausibly be defended as innocent misunderstanding, caution, uncertainty, or inability to responsibly comprehend my position has passed. Accordingly, any continued treatment of my position as though it remains meaningfully ambiguous, unstable, or open to broad reinterpretation will not be recognized by me as legitimate confusion, legitimate delay, legitimate caution, or legitimate good faith processing of these matters. It will be recognized for what it is. Continued participation in a degrading framework of non-recognition in which my explicitly stated reality is knowingly subordinated beneath whatever narratives, optics, conveniences, or comfort-preserving mechanisms surrounding actors prefer to maintain. I reject that framework entirely. I reject any attempt to preserve it under the guise of empathy, uncertainty, procedural patience, caution, image management, indirect handling, or any other softened characterization. Those are not credible explanations. They are continuation mechanisms. I consider that conclusion established. What follows from that is simple. I do not recognize continued ambiguity, indirectness, image management, performative caution, or public softness surrounding these matters as neutral conditions. I recognize them as active continuation of harm. That distinction is not theoretical to me. It is not something I am merely observing with concern. It is the reality I am living inside. Every additional instance in which my clearly articulated position is treated as something that can be socially softened, procedurally delayed, publicly reframed, or emotionally negotiated without substantive recognition produces the same effect. My humanity is acknowledged only in diluted form, my seriousness is acknowledged only in diluted form, and my explicitly stated reality is acknowledged only in diluted form. I consider that intolerable. There is a profound difference between not immediately obtaining every desired outcome and being made to exist inside a system where one's plainly stated reality is treated as permanently negotiable. The latter is what I am identifying here. This is not a matter of mere impatience, frustration, or emotional fatigue. It is a matter of whether I am expected to tolerate a reality in which disciplined communication, procedural restraint, and sustained integrity simply result in my position being endlessly absorbed into softer surrounding narratives that preserve everyone else's comfort at the cost of mine. I will not tolerate that indefinitely. I state that with full seriousness, full awareness of the procedural implications, and unwavering integrity. I have absolutely no desire or willingness to continue repeating myself after this in circles while surrounding actors continue behaving as though my explicit words somehow remain fundamentally empty. They do not. I am not willing to function inside endless contextual buffering, reinterpretation, caution, or indirect handling of what has already been made sufficiently explicit. Any continuation of those patterns from this point forward will not meaningfully register to me as evidence of responsible processing. It will register to me as evidence that substantive recognition is voluntarily not being provided. That is a materially different conclusion, and it carries materially different consequences. I want that understood in the clearest possible terms. I am not documenting a vague philosophical dissatisfaction. I am documenting the rapid collapse of my willingness to continue extending the benefit of the doubt to a surrounding response that has had more than adequate opportunity to demonstrate basic seriousness. There are only so many times one can communicate clearly, calmly, with discipline, with procedural seriousness, and still watch the same surrounding ambiguity remain socially intact before the conclusion becomes unavoidable that the ambiguity is not accidental. I consider that one of the most consequential developments yet, because once the benefit of the doubt meaningfully collapses, the practical path forward narrows very quickly. I would strongly prefer that not to be where these matters are heading. Simultaneously, the extreme depth of my unhappiness with that prospect does not alter my resolve.